Hi everyone. It's just hit 1 o'clock, so we want to get a head start on our thought leader encounter. I know everyone's looking forward to it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing the Hub. I think hopefully everyone's attended a few of our events. You know what the Hub is. It's really about sort of connecting the work in Kramer with work outside Kramer and work that is at the intersection of law and society. In particular, our thought leader encounters is about bringing students and faculty in contact with people, with thought leaders in your space, and to really encourage conversations on difficult topics. So I think a colleague of Haji, Jennifer Thorpe, who we hosted a few weeks ago, mentioned to us that Haji does fantastic work, is very thought-provoking. Why don't you have her for one? And I think given that how people of color move in different spaces has become really a popular conversation, we thought it would be a great idea. And really one of the sentences that was put out for your books sort of like sold me on it. I'm just going to be very disrespectful and look at my phone. It says, in a characteristically candid style, Dawjee pulls no punches when examining the social landscape. From arguing why should rather deal with an open racist than some liberal white people, to drawing on her own experience to convince readers that joining a cult is never a good idea. So I think we're going to give Haji an opportunity to speak for 30-45 minutes and then open up the space for any conversations, comments, thoughts, questions that you have. And if we run out of time, you can always at her on the Twitter, and her handle is @stage_of_absurd. And I'll just hand it over to you.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for having me. I don't know if I'm going to sit or stand or just going to sit here. So thanks to Fatima for having me and the rest of the people who organized it themselves. They feel very humbled to be here. I'm grateful. I don't see myself as a thought leader, but look, if you want to think of me that way, I shan't argue. So I don't know how many of you are acquainted with me or my writing. In some circles I'm popular, in other circles I'm controversial, and in more circles I'm just very unliked. So in whichever category you fit into, welcome. And I hope I don't offend you too much, hopefully. Yeah, it's so nice to be in a space with students and academics. I don't think I've ever done one of these before. It's also very nice to see how comfortable you all are and you're just chowing your meals. I wish our roles were swapped and I was doing the same thing in a very nice, easy, unpretentious environment. Feel free to keep your phones on. This isn't, nothing I say is going to be more important than chatting to a friend and making plans, getting turned later. Yeah, so I was asked to speak about brown woman / black woman moving in white spaces. A lot of questions, or the most popular question that has come up in a lot of my panels and talks and book launches is the concept of brownness as opposed to blackness. And I think a lot of that is misunderstood. There's an ideological misunderstanding that I specifically used the word brown woman because I wanted to distance myself from being black. And that harkens to, I think, an old, archaic apartheid thing of like the separation between coloreds and blacks and Indians and blacks and a weird kind of nationalism, and in fact it's not that at all. It's very much the opposite. And why I say it's the opposite is because I don't want to separate myself from blackness. I don't mean to do that. And if you read the book, you'll notice that there are overlaps between a black woman experience and not a white woman, and a brown woman experience. And there are overlaps and, blankets and sort of universal experiences that we all experience, but in many ways I feel the black woman's story has very much been appropriated by a brown woman. I have a lot of friends, for example, who are, I used to have a lot of friends and now I don't have any, are Indian, for example, and particularly in a Johannesburg context where Johannesburg is very much, aesthetically a blacker city than Cape Town. The adoption of the black identity becomes quite militant and almost degrading because I don't see why Indian people have to adopt a black experience and speak on behalf of the black woman. I just don't think that that's fair, and I think, again, that it's quite ignorant and degrading. So I just wanted to clear that up, first of all, and issue it as a disclaimer. So if you were going to ask that question, I hope I've answered it. I think I've written a bit of a speech. I think I must warn you that it's probably going to be slightly shorter than anticipated, only because I am not an academic. So I don't like massive circle jerks. No offense. I don't like babbling for too long. And also I do want to give you the opportunity to ask, questions and not take too much of your time. I know you have things to go do and books to read and things to learn and things that I was never interested in, unfortunately, and now I regret it. So in talking about brown or black women in white spaces, the system is broken. It's incomplete, it's incompetent, and it's indefensible. I realized it was broken when I was 10 years old, and a teacher pulled me aside at my white primary school in a post-democratic South Africa, where my dad just dropped me off in the middle of the day and told me this was my new school. And she said to me, I can't walk around with a white boy holding hands at a service day around a field, because I was brown and he was white, and I was oil and he was milk, and we would never mix. And then she proceeded to put me in detention in one of the prefab classrooms, where I was made to sit next to a window and look at all the more equal students playing out in the field. By more equal students, I mean all the white students. I realized the system was broken when at this very school on a service day I wore Converse sneakers. I was looked at and made fun of and pointed at, and I was told by teachers as well as students that those were Tsotsi shoes, and that I was never allowed to walk in their spaces with these shoes again. I went home confused because I came from a homogeneous environment where everyone looked like me, walked like me, and talked like me. And those very shoes were a symbol of longevity, pride, and conversation. I realized the system was broken when they followed me around the store, but they didn't follow my white friends around the store. I realized it was broken when I had to spend more to buy my place, to take up space. My body was only worth something if it was paid for. When I sat at the HOD's office at the University of Pretoria, where I did my undergrad, and saw them changing marks, the black students' results were lowered. I realized the system was broken. No, actually in that context, I realized the system was broken a long time before, because I was a music student and my lecturers never failed to tell me that no people that looked like me were pianists, and so I would never be one. That system really broke me. The system is broken because every time a brown or black woman gets a position of power or a leadership position, we have to sit back and question everything. Are we there on merit, or are we there because we're a head count? Are we there because we're a tiny black or brown female, BEE bead on the abacus of a system that's broken? When as a brown or black woman it is expected of you to tread lightly on the feelings of white colleagues, white friends, even white enemies, more so than a black or brown man. Because brown and black women are expected to be quiet, docile, silent, fragile, emotional, sympathetic. And the rules stipulate that we remain silent, kind, forgiving. The system is broken. And so I realized the system was broken when I refused to be a good person of color. when I refused to be the person who bit her tongue to survive, when I refused to be the person who didn't talk about race because it was divisive, when I refused to play white sports or listen to white music or pander to white thoughts. But my lowered head and our lowered voices perpetuate a broken system. And so it perpetuates broken people. I was a broken person until I found the words that, when stitched together, made me whole again, unapologetically. And these are those words. Now, for those of you who've read the book, you'll know that the last chapter is the Sorry, Not Sorry Manifesto. And for those of you who haven't, to preface, it is a chapter that deals with not only the title of the book, but the unapologetic ideology that I've now adopted, in which I refuse to be sorry about being, in my case, a brown woman living through a white world. The Sorry, Not Sorry Manifesto. Sorry, not sorry, I just have to take a sip of water. The Sorry, Not Sorry Manifesto. I believe in bursting the bubble. I believe in constantly crossing the imaginary line of what is okay to say to white people and what is not. I believe that it is our turn to talk and their turn to listen. If they won't, it is often going to be my responsibility to tell them to shut up. At the same time, I believe in picking my battles. Not everyone is worthy of my time and investment. I believe that I am entitled to the silence of my choosing, because I do not have to be a representative for an entire demographic, and I do not have to explain that demographic as an individual. I have had my fair share of white tears, and I no longer thirst for them. I will contribute to a world where people are no longer allowed to live in spaces only selected by their wants and needs. I will contribute by making this clear through conversation and opinion in order to expose these very people to the short-sightedness of their own making. I will contribute to a world where our unreal, unrecognized feelings are made real by troubling the status quo of privilege and encouraging a critical discussion on race. I will contribute to a world where white liberals are forced out of their homogeneous comfort zones and into a place of self-reflection and fault-seeking. I will contribute to a world where those very liberals are no longer allowed to romanticize other cultures and races just because they advocate for charities or NGOs or any other civil rights movements. I will contribute to a world where the comfortable are disturbed, where it is not only the oppressed who are targeted and who often target themselves, as I have done. I will contribute to a world where the white person, regardless of generation, is forced to accept and understand their belonging to a class of the oppressor. I will rattle the cages of the content and comfort the concerned. I will contribute to a world that no longer accepts that confidence is a ticket purchased by privilege and race, giving these people a free ride to the podium and power to speak, often without script, about the issues that belong to us, to me. I will contribute to a world where the woke white is aware that wokeness is often selfish. It is a cloak made of personal gain, whether socially or politically, and the thread of insight is often lacking. I will contribute to a world where the status of this woke white does not give them permission to act as saviors to the less fortunate, so that they can feel righteous and exceptional, thereby consoling themselves. I will contribute to a world where I too can make myself rich with the fortunes of confidence. Here's what I know for sure. There's a good racist and there's a bad racist. I prefer the latter. The latter wears his or her spots proudly and is easier to identify. The good racist is work. The good racist, when accused of racism, is shielded by their identification as an anti-racist. When confronted by accusations of racism, however subtly these are practiced, the good racist resorts to tears. Tears are work, and I know for sure that I will no longer be providing the tissues to wipe up this degree of self-pity. This is not my job, nor is it my job to act like I am invisible. I know for sure that I will change my approach. I will no longer hang around silently while the audible voices around me hold a forum of their useful contributions. I know for sure that it is both okay and useful for the woke white to struggle with their own conscience, to feel guilt, fear, doubt, and self-castigation. I know for sure that this is healthy, and any contribution I make to doctor this situation and treat them as victims is not healing at all. It perpetuates the problem. The good racist is work, but the good racist is not my job. The good racist is the good racist's problem, and I will no longer contribute to fixing or healing them without having done the same for myself first. I know for sure that white privilege and racism have taught me that I am not entitled to my own feelings and opinions. I know for sure that they have built a world in which they have plenty of space, and I am entitled to very little. I know for sure that my thoughts and ideas have existed without consideration, yet in this world I have been taught to consider the feelings of others. I know for sure that my socialization in this world has been defined by shutting up, hiding who I really am, staying out of the way, and being grateful for being allowed to even exist in certain spaces. I know for sure that this stops now. I know for sure that those who are protected by their own liberal ideologies struggle to listen to voices that they do not identify with, even if this is not obvious to them. I know for sure that when they enter a racially diverse room, they immediately divide the area into the haves and have-nots, without even thinking about it. They know that they are among the haves and duty-bound to show charity to the have-nots. It is true that there are those with privilege and those without, but by categorizing the world in this way and positioning themselves as saviors, these liberals exert their privilege to survive a changing system that is threatening to them. Here's how I know what I know for sure. I've witnessed the capturing of conversations about diversity, political correctness, or any kind of human right. I have seen white liberals appropriate the conversation and decide what is worthy of outrage and what isn't. I have seen them slyly slip from one side when speaking through powerful structures like the media to the other at casual, close-circle storytelling around a braai. The changing of teams is a regular occurrence in safe environments. I've seen this side swap occur as a means to a racist end, or as a tragic stab at good humor. I've been irritated by the giddy reactions of woke whites when they are confronted with the injustices committed by members of their own race, who they deem less enlightened than they are. The bad whites versus the good whites. But I have realized that there is one thing that binds them, and that is their contribution to a reality that is actually quite fucked. A reality they have the power to escape at any time. And I have realized that not all of them have accepted this truth. I know what I know for sure because I am real. I am a person who has, like so many others, been subjected to a world where white feelings have flooded my own, who has been convinced systemically that being a person of color is only torture and suffering. As a child, this was beyond my comprehension. It split my mind into two with a trauma that raised its ugly head every now and then, because I continue to live in a system where I need in many ways to survive before I can just thrive. Conclusion. I am not sorry about refusing to prioritize white feelings when it comes to conversations about structural racism. I'm not sorry about the fact that you do not want to hear me. Your denial is your baggage, and it will not stop me from raising my voice. I'm not sorry that my raised voice offends you, or that you suffer an emotional disconnect because of it. There's always been one, and I won't feel sorry for you if you have not realized this yet. I will not be sorry for making it known to you that it is impossible for you to fully embrace me, a person of color, as an equal whose feelings are as valid as your own, because you still operate under the umbrella of privilege that holds your own emotions in higher regard than my own, or anyone else's, whether you realize it or not. To fully embrace me, you must acknowledge this and believe it. I'm not sorry if any of the above is confusing to you. I'm not sorry about the pain that this very confusion brings. I'm not sorry about the fact that I will not be a gymnast, cartwheeling around my words and thinking about what the right and wrong thing is to say in order to pierce through your denial of politics and race. I'm not sorry that our experiences of race come from a different place. When we engage in conversation about it, I won't be sorry for saying that it is impossible for your opinion to carry any weight, regardless of how much amplification your liberalness buys you. You cannot have an opinion on the details of a problem that does not affect you personally. We are not equals in the fight to end discrimination. I'm not sorry that in this type of engagement, you are the lesser, the ill-equipped. I'm not sorry that your rainbow nation did not work out. That you have tried your best to be a nice white person and you feel cheated by your efforts. Because you cannot see that your disappointment in the lack of fruition of said rainbow nation lacks empathy. I'm not sorry that you feel silenced. I'm not sorry for this because your feeling silence slaps the faces of those who have been silenced for far too long. Check yourself. I'm not sorry that my truth offends you. Even if you are a good person, my truth has faced consequences, and it will face consequences still. When you speak the same truth, you are seen as a hero among your people, while your silence is a way to get ahead in life. Your preachy wisdom on diversity is a way to get ahead in life as well. It's all win-win. I'm not sorry that I will question this almost genetic entitlement without once again tiptoeing around your feelings, so as not to implicate you personally. A structure has many parts. You are one of them. I'm not sorry about that. I'm not sorry that I refuse to let you exercise that entitlement towards me. You are not entitled to my time, my energy, my efforts. I am in control of that. Exercising this control does not mean that I will change this white world, but at least I can tip the scales in my favor. I am not sorry that I will no longer ignore racial, economic, and social segregation and the psychological effects it has had on me in exchange for making it in your world. I am not sorry that I will no longer justify my right to have nice things in letters of apology penned in pain. I am not sorry that it is not my job to liberate you from the chains of privilege, from the prison of your own collective thought. And I am not sorry that it is your responsibility to come to terms with the oppression that accompanies that privilege, the oppression that your liberal mind inflicts on you, shaped as it is by institutions and practices that at the heart of it all are divisive and exploitative. The onus is on you to come to terms with that. I'm not sorry that I question you, that I doubt you, that I think you are different, and that sometimes I think you are dangerous. I am not sorry that I am no longer afraid. Sorry, but I'm not sorry. Now, before we get to questions, as you probably noticed by now, I'm no poet. So, I'd like to end with a poem by Maya Angelou, which refers to a he, but I think that, in your own minds, if you so wish, you should change the he's to she's. I do that sometimes because I find it very empowering. And I also think of Maya Angelou as a universal leader and stalwart in black and brown women's liberation struggle. I know why the caged bird sings. A free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream, till the current ends and dips its wing in the orange sun rays and dares to claim the sky. But a bird that stalks down his narrow cage can seldom see through his bars of rage. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still. And his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. The free bird thinks of another breeze, and the trade winds soft through the sighing trees, and the fat worms waiting on the dawn bright lawn, and he names the sky his own. But a caged bird stands on the grave of dreams. His shadow shouts on a nightmare scream. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Haji. So before we do the question and answer, can I just check with you, is the temperature still okay? This room has two sort of climates. It's either punishingly cold or furiously hot.
It's fine, it's all good.
Okay, some questions, some thoughts, some comments. There's a lot to let percolate there. Let's see one. Can I also invite some of the people sitting on the floor? There are some chairs here, guys. Do you want to move so long? Gabby, you're fine? Okay. Then we'll go ahead with you.
Thanks. My name is Victoria. There seems to be, from what I gather from your manifesto, a decision that you've made to separate yourself from white people, from privileged people, not to educate, not to explain anything. I have a friend who's doing his thesis on the idea that white people ought to almost be stripped of their whiteness in order for us to be able to inhabit space with them. But that, for him, involves a more militant, undertaking on the part of people. Do you see any merit in that? For me, I can see merit in sort of both sides. I can see merit in separating yourself, and I can see merit in the need for, as most wars, when you reflect on war, you don't really ask why there was a war. You don't really hate them for undertaking one. Maybe you're upset that there was a war, but there's a respect to the issue for which there was a war for. And do you think that the fact that there wasn't a civil war in South Africa is something that will always either have people wanting one or wanting to separate themselves from the oppressor? Can you reconcile those in any way?
Yeah, look, I mean, I don't think that I would ever call for a civil war, because I don't think, I guess sometimes there's merit in that, but often there isn't. I do think South Africa does lack, and we've missed, I think, pre and post-democratically, as a young nation, an opportunity for a civil and societal cleansing, if that makes sense. And the reason why the manifesto speaks of a separation is because we've never addressed that. We've always been sold this payoff line of a togetherness and a rainbow nationness, and I don't think discrepancies and understandings and discourse can take place when this togetherness is perpetuated, because it's a bit of a false notion. They say you can't see the field if you're in the field. And so the separation is to sort of take ourselves out of the field. there is merit in a certain kind of militancy, I guess. But I am not, like, I think I've lived my life that way for quite a while. I've lived my life in a silent militancy in which, you know, I was constantly engaged in an existential battle with myself. Then I went to a process of like sort of an external, more vocal militancy, where I took it on as my job to constantly be the soothsayer and the preacher and the educator of, you know, a group of people or a demographic, or, you know, telling people like, you can't say this, this is right, that is wrong. But I also came to a point where I was just like, do you know what, like, you live in this world. You live in this society. Are you so blinded and chained by the discomfort and disposition of your own privilege that you won't, like you say, disrobe? You know, because privilege is armor. It is armor. And to remove that privilege takes a lot of energy and it takes a lot of time. So in each of our own ways, I think, in whichever way we're equipped and skilled, we do need to do what we can. And there is a place for your friend's thesis and militancy and stuff like that. But it is also the place of affirming a stance of identity, affirming a stance of struggle, story, ideology, whatever it may be, so that, you know, instead of defining what white people should feel like and making them feel better about themselves, because I found it's often the case. Like, maybe it's just a lack of growth on my part, but I often found that if I have these conversations, militant or not, I always find myself on the back foot and needing to make someone feel better about themselves. And I just got so tired of that. You know, I already know your story. It's in my history books. It's in my classroom. It's in my lecture halls. It's in my workplace. I already know your story. It's been parroted to me in a fashion like over and over again. You don't know mine, so let me write it and let me tell it. And it's your job to consume that information. And yeah, hope that answers your question a little bit. Any other questions?
I'm Charita. Mine is about, as an Indian brown woman, I feel like as Indian people, we've assimilated so far into like whiteness that we've lost a lot of our culture and our language. And then we try to put ourselves into the black narrative where we don't really belong. So I don't really know how we can go about interrogating what the brown identity is when our community is so closed off to it. Because I've tried to start a similar conversation in my community, and most of the people above like 30 were like, what are you doing? Like, why are you dividing us and all these things? So I just want to know, what do you think the steps are towards us interrogating our brownness?
I think, you know, there's a certain degree of individuality and agency that's required in an instance like that. I mean, I come from sort of like a mixed heritage, and you know, I'm the product of an intercultural marriage, but my mom is Indian Muslim, and yeah, her family bugs the shit out of me. You know, because there's this narrative going on now at the EFF, which I'm sure you didn't miss, where, you know, they're kind of attacking Indian people for being racist. And I'm sorry, but I think they are. They are very racist. And there's an intra-racism that happens among Indian people, which I don't think anyone out of that society really recognizes, because I think you know, if you think about Indianness or Indian communities as like a magazine, it's always quite flashy on the outside, and it looks quite together and almost wealthy and, you know, whatever the case is. But it's actually quite disjointed if you read between those lines. But no one will ever say that. No Indian person will ever admit that. Because no one wants to divide and conquer, I guess, their own people to an extent. Indian people also suffer from, you know, this really archaic notion of like the caste system. I mean, we came here, some of us as indentured laborers, some of us as slaves. And it's sad that in the history of South Africa as a country, we seem to have forgotten our place in a struggle and rather adopted this hierarchy that comes from a culture that we belong to. And there is a lot of space for that, and a lot of respect for that, and a lot of education behind that. But there's also a lot of racism behind that. I mean, in my family, I'm seen as like too dark. They often like tell me I'm not beautiful because I'm too dark. I'm too black. My mother used to put me in a bathtub and scrub me with like sunlight soap to like get the brown off me, because you know, fair is a standard of beauty. As a result, I obviously ended up spending more time in the sun than I should have. But I think, you know, we often forget that there is a generation of people, Indian, black, colored, who adopt the principles and the ideas they adopt in order to survive. I had a conversation with a student at Stellenbosch the other day at a colored identity panel, who said, you know, she tries to have this conversation with her grandmother also about why colored people are racist, and she tries to like talk about feminism and empowerment and that sort of thing. And these aren't simple things, there are levels to this. And she said, you know, my grandmother, whenever I try to talk to her, I hit a brick wall. And I said to her, you know, maybe don't think of the wall as a brick wall, maybe think of the wall as protection, because it's been embedded there for so long. You know, there's a history of like having to add bricks to this wall over a long, long generational period of time in order to protect yourself, and in order to thrive, and in order to survive. So in many ways, maybe there's a degree of empathy that as a younger generation, we need to learn and to be able to recognize in terms of that before not only disregarding it, but fully separating ourselves from it, because a degree of understanding is needed, and difference doesn't always have to mean divisiveness. Yeah.
So I wonder if I can abuse the chair a bit and ask you a question. So I'm really interested by thinking about or wondering about who you wrote the book for. Because, you know, a lot of the times with conversations like these, it feels or can feel like you're already speaking to the converted, or we're having the conversation amongst ourselves. And those who need to hear the conversation, those who need to be pushed to that point of reflection and self-reflection that you talk about, aren't in the room. So I'm just interested to know, who are you writing for? Who is your ideal person to pick up the book on the other end?
Right.
Yeah.
That's a very good question. Also one I've been asked before. And I think initially, you know, when I went into writing this book, I thought of it as a project towards like empowering, like you say, an already existing audience. Because I think, you know, if you think of things in terms of like economics, the trend is changing now where a lot of books like these are starting to surface. But my personal experience within the media industry was that I'm surprised by this opportunity. I don't know if I'll ever get it again. And I need to say what I need to say. And I don't care if white people don't listen, and I don't care if white people don't like it, because I'm writing it for my people. But then through the process and through like, you know, lots of like thinking and research and writing the book, and once it was launched and engaging with audiences and engaging with people, I actually realized that this book isn't only for black and brown women or, you know, a black audience. It is actually for white people. And it's a book that's threatening to white people, and it's a book that is going to make them uncomfortable, you know. It's a book that's like, you know, if you read, if you're watching a film with your parents and you think it's a lovely film, and then smack out of nowhere it's this awkward sex scene, you know. This is that version of events for like white people. They're like, oh, you know, it's so lovely, it's a cute little brown woman, you know, writing down, like, telling little tales, and then, you know, smack, they get hit by the manifesto, or they get hit by some other kind of satire that's going to sort of shift them in their seats and maybe anger them, or maybe make them feel sad, or maybe make them feel like bad people, or, you know, maybe make them feel opposed to South Africa and buy their tickets to Australia and whatever. But whatever that reaction is actually, you know, Oscar Wilde used to say, what other people think of you is none of your business. And so my hope is that white people do read this. And if they want to move to Australia, then they must. But at least I know that there are people out there who will embrace the discomfort, and who embrace the perceived threat, and who I hope will really be jogged into thinking very hard about this notion of hatred, when actually anything we say comes from a place of love, because it's not nice to hate by people.
Yes.
Negative feelings are not nice. I don't like feeling angry. I don't like feeling cheated. I don't like feeling silenced. I don't like feeling like I have a vendetta against you, or like a bitterness or whatever, you know. But all these things are a means to a peaceful end, however, like, you know, cynical we want to be about that. Any other questions? Yeah.
I noticed at the back of your book that you said that Islam is not as anti-feminist as it's perceived to be. That was just an interesting statement. Please could you elaborate on it? I haven't read your book. Are you still practicing Islam, but say you were raised that way?
If you haven't read my book, I can't answer your question. So I was raised, I come from a Muslim family, obviously, so I was raised Muslim, but my dad is extremely feminist, my grandfather is more feminist. So I'll give you an example of where this feminism and Islam space was carved for me. I went to this like Muslim preschool thing. Because I mean, when you come from like a group areas at community, there aren't a lot of places you can go for like an education, you know. So like attracts like, so you just go to what you know, I guess. And I went there, and towards the middle or end of that year, I remember I was very young, and my dad and grandfather were, you know, very popular in the community and very well known. My dad's a dentist who dealt a lot with like the gold teeth of gangsters. And my grandfather went to teachers training college at the age of 40 and became a teacher. So everyone like there's only one school, high school, you know, so he taught there for many years and everyone knew him. And so these people who were starting a Muslim school in the area, the first in like Tshwane at the time, came to my grandfather and my dad, and they had a meeting. And I remember I just finished practicing piano, so I was like, you know, in the vicinity, because like there weren't a lot of places to go. And then, you know, they explained this to them, and they were like, they brought a picture of the uniforms and like all this stuff. And halfway through, my grandfather just stopped them, and he said, "My child will never go to a school where there's any kind of segregation, especially where boys have to sit in one room and girls have to sit in another room, because we all know that that is divisive, and girls get a different education to what boys get, and they're not lesser human beings. More than that, they will never go to a school where there is no cultural integration, because the world doesn't operate in a space where everyone you see is only Muslim." And he was also very aware of like the propaganda that these schools kind of spread, you know. And so this was kind of a seed that was planted in terms of the whole feminist thing and whatever. And I don't see myself as like a practicing Muslim anymore, because I have a lot of issues with, I guess you could say like religion as a whole. I have a problem with, you know, how the hadiths are translated, and how, you know, people sort of cherry pick what they want to feed their own propaganda, their own ways of thinking and stuff like that. But in order to have any of those opinions, it was very important to me to educate myself. So I think in youth terms it's called bringing receipts, or coming with receipts or something. So I do have all the receipts, and I have equipped myself very well, and in doing so I was able to write a chapter on all the powerful women in Islam that are sort of just erased from history. Because the Quran is a lovely book about, you know, fantasy stories about splitting the oceans and whales swallowing people and, you know, all kinds of things. But it is also a historical book, and it's a book of facts, which we often forget.
Can I ask you another question?
Yeah.
So the book is, sorry, I'm just trying to think of how to phrase this. I guess my question is about what self-care processes are necessary to write a book like this, because you crack yourself open, right? So you crack yourself open and you spill onto the pages some hilarious stuff, but you also spill onto the pages some really hard stuff, you know, sort of your journey with depression. And so what do you do to hold yourself when you're cracking yourself open and sort of, you know, pouring yourself out? What was your process? What are your self-care processes?
Lots of therapy and chronic medication. And going to the gym. The gym is a very good idea, but so is cake. I think you have such uneasiness with this term self-care. I know it's a very popular term these days, but I don't know. I think as a self-deprecating person, almost seems like a bit arrogant to me, but I know it's not. To a large extent, I guess this book was its own kind of therapy, because you make yourself small in a society for so long that it is therapeutic and fulfilling and liberating to be able to make yourself almost big through a story, you know. And it was very hard to write certain chapters. Like, it was hard to write the chapter about my dad and religion and coming out. It was hard to write the chapter about depression, the diary of depression. It was hard to write the chapter about cults and how in black and brown societies mental illness isn't recognized. And everyone's always telling you to pray your way out of depression, you know, and how in that instance I was forced to just reach for something that would make me reach myself again. And in my situation, it just happened to be a cult, and who knew? So, I don't know what self-care is beyond, I don't know, what do people even do these days? Like, have facials? Do manicures or whatever. Self-care to me is always buying a nice pair of sneakers. Yes. I'm busy talking though, you know, just because you're my wife doesn't mean yes, okay, go.
Why are you married to a white person? Jokes, they're all thinking it though. So there's been a lot of discussion lately about the role, if any, that men should play in a campaign against gender-based violence. And one argument is that actually men should play the full role because they're responsible for gender-based violence. Do you think there are parallels there between the role white people should or shouldn't play in discussions about racism? Do you see those two subject positions?
Absolutely. You know, we're always like, my friend Sarah was, you know, she works for Nedbank, and she was telling us about this charming Women's Day workshop that they had, you know, it was just filled with women and pink ribbons and champagne and like, I don't know, just like lols. But anyway, it was a room full of women talking about women's issues, and she raised a very good point, which I am also, you know, a believer of, is that why aren't men being educated in Women's Month? You know, why aren't they being dragged out of their offices, and why don't they go do like a little pink parade? And you know, I mean, I'm not saying they must get manicures, but they definitely do need some kind of like mental self-care when it comes to issues on women and gender-based violence and that kind of thing. And I do, and it goes back to your question, and you know, to connect, to piggyback off the two. The audience for this then should be white people, because we don't need to be educated about our own struggles. We've lived it. We also don't need to be educated about the privilege of white people. We see it all the time. But white people do need that. I hope you've listened. Taking some tips there. Yes.
Very glad you raised the point, because my question is with regards to that, because a lot of what you're saying, I see a lot of intersectionality between race and gender. And I guess my question then is, what is the role? And when I felt like I didn't have the root cause to speak, obviously. But when you then said that your father and your grandfather are feminists, I find it problematic when men identify as feminists. Not because of the obvious reason, but I think it's almost a ploy to gaslight women. So you identify. So when you then say something that is problematic, you can say, but I'm on the side, so you should listen to what I'm saying because I'm a feminist like you. So I prefer a situation where you let your actions show where your allegiance lie, and so I think it's just virtue signaling. So I guess my question then is, what is the role of allies in I guess the struggle, whether it be feminist or race related, especially for the fact that the reality of everybody's lived experience is intersectional. You don't get how you occupy a space is not simply by virtue of your gender or your race. It is also goes down to your country in some context. So I guess the question is, what is the role of allies, people who by their actions genuinely understand what you're saying and genuinely want to help? And then my second question is, what is your take on code switching? When you enter a space and for the purpose of seeming to fit, do you think it's a good practice, or you think it is in itself self-deprecating and self-effacing to get into a space where you have to then become something else to fit into that space?
Very good questions. I just want to clarify, I think if you asked my grandfather, may he rest in peace, or my father if they are feminists, I don't think they would self-identify as one. But I think in growing up, and like you say, like I think through listening to their actions, and when they spoke with their actions, I think eventually I came to that conclusion by myself. But I do think that you are right. There is a self-proclamation and virtue signaling that comes with, men, where the tendency to proclaim that they're feminist or to identify as that does come with a lot of gaslighting. Because we mustn't forget that patriarchy occupies a lot of space. And within patriarchal society, yes, there are pockets of male feminist organizations or like whatever, but they are still afforded the privilege of having louder voices within those spaces. And we must be aware of that, and they must be aware of that, and I think made aware of that as well. How we actually do it, outside of just talking and telling them and smacking them, I don't know. Maybe that's a good start. When it comes to your second question about code switching is a very, it is a bit of like, I feel sad about the code switching problem. But it's a problem that needs a lot of understanding and a lot of empathy, because again, we come from a place where we had to do certain things to fit in. We had to do certain things to not be bullied or to not be called names, or even just to have like a friend sometimes. You have to do certain things. And I feel extremely proud of the people who, I went through my entire high school career without having any friends, like a single friend. Because like I said in my opening words, I refused to play white sports or to listen to white music or whatever the case is. You do certain things where you have to fit in, whether it's code switching or aesthetically or whatever the case is. And it's a very sad pattern of behavior, which was necessitated by a time in which we had to survive, to fit in. And a psychological behavior and a societal behavior is a very difficult thing to get rid of. One of the biggest conversations that is happening right now, be it in silence, is, for example, whether transgender women can truly let go of the privileges they had as men. Can they? I don't know. These are things that we're still figuring out. The textbooks are still being written. We are a very young democracy. The term coconut is very offensive, and it's very harmful because it steals away from the true identity of that person and what they had to go through in order to exist in certain contextual spaces. And these are things we need to unlearn. I don't know how you unlearn that. I don't have a crystal ball. But I just go back to empathy and to education and to understanding. You can't write someone off without hearing their story.
So you've got Nigel, and you've got one here, and you've got La Lady.
So go ahead.
Start with you.
It's kind of going off what his question was, but just operating under the assumption that like it doesn't really end. Like once you like become aware of like all these problematic behaviors and everything, doesn't necessarily mean that you can stop. So like speaking of separation, like if we were truly to separate ourselves from white people, like in a lot of ways that would mean like separating ourselves from a lot of like privilege or like opportunities that we don't want to do. And so to fit into these places and to be afforded these opportunities, like you might still have to do those things, and like that could entail things like the way that you speak or like the way that you do your hair and everything. And I was wondering what would be like your advice or your opinion on how to, I suppose, like manage yourself in situations where it's kind of inevitable that you still have to like revert to this sort of behavior just to be able to be treated as equal, even if you're aware of how wrong it is that you should be forced to do this.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I don't think there's that all of what you said is extremely true. And one of the things I talk about is like picking your battles. And the reason why I say pick your battles is because there is a certain degree of cowardice behind picking your battles. In that, like you said, you can't be militant all the time, you know. Because yes, we do live in a system that's white. My publishers are white, you know. But I had a choice between going with a publisher that was uncomfortable and wanted me to change certain things about my book, and another publisher who was fine with it. Both of those are white systems, but I made a decision not based on how many copies of the book would be sold, for example, and this is a very economic example, but on where my principles and ethics lay. It's very difficult because I think we're all discovering this about ourselves, and by proxy, we're educating the people on where our lines are and where our lines aren't. But you can't change a system if you don't change. And so there is a certain degree of change that's needed within us, where we're not afraid to say no to certain things, we're not afraid to say yes to certain things. And we have to be in the unfortunate or very fortunate position to be wise enough to make a system work for us. You know, make institutions work for us. If I don't let a white publisher publish me, I don't get to write my book. But I have to choose the publisher in a way where they work for me instead of the opposite way around. Someone else had a question?
Just as a broad person writing, I think what's interesting, like in the larger scheme, is like it's interesting to me that like people like Mongani or Rubika or even like Angelou in like the queer scene get taken up a lot more than like black people do writing, despite saying sometimes similar things. And so how do you see yourself in that kind of pick up the fact that like even if you're saying radical stuff, white people are going to find you more palatable than if it's a black person saying it, and are there things sometimes that you think are better not said by you and better said by other people?
In my personal experience, I haven't found that to be the case. I've actually found it to be the opposite. I think because this brown identity and this, you know, even this colored identity and the brown people thing, like if you look at like books that are written by colored people, for example, it's things like Nume Scully or, you know, that kind of thing, with the Ellen Paki's book, for example, where those are very real and very necessary and very true stories, but they aren't necessarily narratives like the ones I'm telling, you know, about my upbringing or my engagement with the world or my socialization, that kind of thing. So that definitely hasn't been my experience, mostly because the market caters more towards a black writer. So your Sisonke Msmangs and your Redi Tlabis and whatever are doing very important, very significant work, and they're saying very important things. But the response, I think, to their work is much more engaging and much more audible than it is for my work, or maybe even positive, because I think no one expects it from someone like me, because brown people are so often seen as allies because the discrepancy is not as jarring as the difference between, you know, what is ultimately black and white.
I think my question is maybe building on some of the things how do we sort of expect the deeply divided brown working class to organize against whiteness, I guess? How do we see that happening when things amongst, I don't know, I'm looking at the Khartoum, Cape Town, there's just so much distracting us amongst ourselves. I mean, there's a history to it. So how are we expected to move from that position that we've been in for the past years? And then my second one is a question of these conversations happen under very specific circumstances and under very class circumstances as well. It's a seminar room, we expected to act a certain way, engage politely, ask questions, all of these things. But what happens when, I don't know, I think my problem is that these conversations, just maybe it's because it's in the nature of it, they have been happening in these kinds of forums for like a very long time. And I guess my question is, how do you have these conversations in ways where they stop being convenient to have? So the situation where you are confronted with something in the classroom, this conversation is a clear indication that something, some sort of intervention is needed. How do we then go from, I guess, this space to that space? I don't want to call it the ground, it's not necessarily the ground, but into a more pragmatic space, or where the violence or the structural interpersonal just becomes infeasible, imminent when it does in these kinds of spaces.
Well, can I ask you how do you currently deal with it, or do you just not deal with it at all?
I don't know, you keep quiet, you keep it moving. I don't know, you have, like, people have parts and responsibilities and things that are expected from them. Like, we can't intervene at every single moment in time, but there are just like discrepancies, for example, how institutions may encourage dialogue under very specific circumstances and discourage it under maybe another circumstance. And how do
You know, this is going to sound like a really, really fickle thing, and in many ways it is. Because I hate when things like this are lauded as some kind of like prize or something. But when I went to the University of Pretoria, we were starved of conversations like these, regardless of context or what the reason was and the motivation was behind them and what certain environments called for and what certain environments didn't. We were completely starved for conversations like these. We used to have them amongst our friends, you know, in small isolated groups. But they were never organized. It was never by invitation. There were never opportunities, you know, for white people to go listen to them, which was more necessary than us going to have them. And so in that way, again, it seems fickle and like almost like a, you know, backhanded slap and like a very secondary prize. But in that way, I guess in retrospect, it's taken us long to get here, but we are kind of somewhere. You know, like these conversations are happening. Whether or not they happen more is up to us. But in order to have a conversation, you must arm yourself with the language to have it. A lot of people aren't armed with language. Language is a carrier of culture, it's a carrier of history, it's a carrier of knowledge. You can't, for example, say you want to get rid of science because it's a Western notion, you know, because what are you going to replace it with? It's fine to get rid of something, but you must arm yourself with the knowledge of what you're going to replace it with. We stop speaking for the sake of speaking, and we need to go back and revisit the history books and rewrite them if we need to. And talking about history books, that also deals with this concept of the colored group that you mentioned. Sorry, what are they called? Khatful Cape Town, you know, and this weird notion of like nationalism and like whatever. Like, if you don't know where you come from and you don't know who you are, how do you even know where you're going? You just adopt this pattern of behavior that has been preached to you like over and over again until you become khatful, and then, you know, shit like that happens. You know, I heard such a profound thing on the show that we're watching, The Good Fight, last night, where this woman gives a speech at someone's funeral, and is a lawyer and a civil rights activist and whatever. And she says he was born in a time when the Nazis were marching in the street. And in Trump's America, he died in a time when the Nazis were marching in the street. So history won't rewrite itself until we do. And the only way we do that is to revisit the stories, is to rewrite it, is to tell it. The lion will never tell the story of the lamb. And Gatful, Cape Town, is the product of a society that has taught them to be like that because it's the only thing they know in a city that is stereotypically white, when actually it is a city built on the backs of their forefathers. It is a brown city. You know, where's that information? At the District 6 Museum. How many times must we go there? Is it okay if I make this my last question? Because I have to hurry up. Yes.
I just wanted to ask, like, how do you deal with the tensions which somehow emanates when you have these type of hard discussions or conversations with people close to you? And speaking of this, it can relate either whether it's me expressing my views on Men Are Trash, or me expressing my views on feminism to a male figure who's very close to me, or me speaking to my white friend from like high school about, listen, actually you privileged and you actually kind of the shit. How do you deal with the person? How do you break? I don't want to, like you already said, like those barriers which are there are barriers of protection, but how do you go about those conversations tactfully and in a way which will be effective without making the person feel like, actually, I don't need you in my life. That's what I'm trying to say. Like, how do you show that this is actually a conversation coming from the bottom of my heart because this is how I feel, I guess.
I don't think you can change I believe that everyone has a degree of empathy. But I don't think you can change the makeup of what that empathy looks like. And maybe I don't believe that because I'm just jaded and I've had far too many of those conversations. But one of the most important lessons I think you can learn in life is that there is a need to purge yourself of certain people. And that doesn't have to be an aggressive thing. You know, it doesn't have to be an I don't need you in my life kind of thing. It can be an organic process that just sort of terminates itself in a holistic end or whatever the case is. And I learned that very hard lesson after drinking far too many white tears or male tears, for example, and you just become satiated by all of it, and then it just spills over into something else. But you know, I always say this to people, and I think outside of race and outside of politics and outside of privilege and economics and whatever, there are good actions and there are bad actions. You know, there's a good story and there's a bad story. There are good people and there are bad people. You know, which person do you want to be? Do you want to be the person who hates the story of apartheid because you weren't involved, maybe? Because by the very nature of hating that story or denying that story or being reminded of it, you're choosing the wrong side of history. You're choosing to be a cuck person, you know? And then the opposite side of that is you can just choose to be a good person. And I think as someone on the opposite side of that who is trying to look another human being straight in the eye and saying, you know, can you see me beyond any of this and choose the empathy behind all of it? You don't have control over that. Like, you just don't. I won't say you have to hope for the best, but any outcome is an outcome that has the ability to empower you for future conversations.
Thank you very, very much
Thank you guys for having me.
Making our first thought leader of the semester such a vibrant one, such an interesting one. Thank you for your book. I would really recommend that you guys get a copy. There are some on sale outside at a discounted price of 200 rand. And obviously you can get it signed for the 5 seconds that Haji's going to be around. But really, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you very much and keep writing.
Thank you.
So please join me in giving our thanks.